You might be surprised by what you see on the screen at the moment. These images are very much not the future, but the past. In fact, they are from about 50 years ago. And why is that important? Well, those who are students today who are completing their undergraduate degree, many of them, as you'll see in the data a little bit later, will be working into their 70s, perhaps even into their 80s in one or two cases. And this gives you a sense of how much change has been in the world just in the last 50 years. So all of these images are from around 1970. The space hopper was the most popular Christmas toy in the UK in 1969. Pan Am completed their first transatlantic flight with a 747 at about this time. The yellow car is, I believe, a Ford Cortina Mark II, which was the most popular car, or one of the most popular cars in the UK. And the electronic dashboard on the right, it may look like something out of a Doctor Who set, but it in fact is an IBM computer from 1970. So you get a sense straight away of how much the world has changed in 50 years, and therefore how much it might change in the next 50 years, the careers that young people have, the learning that they'll have to go through to maintain their careers. But actually, this is perhaps a falsehood, because change has been so much quicker just in the last 10 or 15 years than it has ever been in those 50 years since 1970. But let me give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to draw on a range of research that we've done, but specifically two particular projects that we've done this year. So the study with LinkedIn, a new era of higher education, which looks at different generations and what learning they want and how they want to learn. And then See the Future, which we undertook with the FMD and GMAC, where we surveyed about 2,500 students, faculty and employers, asking them very clearly about the future of business education, the future of work. And we'll draw in one or two bits and pieces from some other studies that we do. You can see them there on the left of the screen. These are 5 studies that we do every year with a host of business schools around the world. If you want to know more about any of these studies, then just visit our website and you can find out information about them and even download one or two of them free of charge. So I said change has happened incredibly quickly in recent years, and this graphic, I think, probably explains things pretty well. So you can see on the far left, LinkedIn and Facebook began 2003, 2004. Twitter followed quite soon afterwards. Then Netflix only started streaming in 2007. And the Chinese microblogging site Weibo, there you go, 2009. So just 11 years old. So the fact is, these services are part of our lives, part of almost everybody's life in some way. It touches them at some point. And yet 10, 15 years old at most, the pace of change is enormous, and the generation that are coming up today are absolutely embedded in this digital world. And you'll see in the data that we're going to present how important that is to their learning, to their working, to their development. So let me begin with this slightly whimsical graphic, if you like. We would suggest there are 4 key stages of learning. So you begin on the left with your first degree, and then a master's, perhaps some lifestyle learning, and ultimately later an executive learning. And why is this important? Well, in most comprehensive universities with a business school, almost 80% of the effort is focused on that first degree stage, the undergraduate part of delivery. The reality is that in the future, 80% of the potential audience of business education is going to be beyond a first degree. It'll be the master's, it'll be the lifestyle, the lifelong learning, the executive, later learning. The market of people aged 30 plus all the way up to the 70s, where they're still going to be working, looking for development, looking for learning, looking for education, it is enormous compared to that small group of 18 to 21-year-olds or 18 to 22-year-olds, perhaps under 25, who make up the bulk of the first degree marketplace. So there will be an enormous challenge for universities and business schools to really almost completely reverse the effort and impact that they put into engaging learners. Rather than focusing on that very young age group, they'll be focusing on a much longer group of, or a much greater group of learners from sort of 30, maybe even a little younger, up until they're 70. And I think this is a great quote. It's a few years old now, but from a chap called Jaime Casap, who was a chief education evangelist at Google. And he really clearly sets out the different way that young people, Generation Z as he calls them, are looking at their futures, at how they can start a business very easily, at how they can just engage at a young age and do something completely different, rather than this sort of life of a single career that people experience in the future. And all right, the image is a little bit over the top perhaps, but it makes the point about how much has changed. And of course, if young people are setting up businesses at a very young age, then probably the type of learning that they want and the way that they learn will change as well. It may not be linear in one lump at the beginning of a career, but spread out over a period of years, providing them with the skills and knowledge that they need at certain times to do certain tasks and to develop their business in certain ways. And I think this is a great way of explaining that. The image is an interesting one. Of course, both the current president and the incoming president were in their 70s when they contested the election recently. And it gives you a good idea of how people will keep on working over an extended lifetime. There it is, the third bullet point. When we ask students, 41% say they expect to be working into their 70s. Two other important points there. Just over half of the sample from See the Future saying they expect to change career completely at least once in their lifetime, and they expect to start a business or work for themselves at some point in their lives. So students already have a different idea, a sense of what their careers and their futures are going to look like. And they're going to be changing, they're going to be doing different things, and they're going to be much longer than they were before. Now, it's not surprising, given these perspectives, that 84% already recognize they'll have to learn new skills to advance their career in the future. 69% therefore want schools, business schools, to offer a wide range of courses to enable lifelong learning. And just over 6 out of 10, again, want more flexible approaches from business schools to taking a degree. So that they'll look to learn new skills at different times in different ways as their careers progress. And that's incredibly important for business schools to understand it. It means that rather than the focus on degree, rather than a focus on starting a program at a fixed point, they will have to find ways of delivering more than degrees at different times, in different ways, in a flexible manner that meets more of the needs of those who are seeking to learn. And what do students prioritize in their learning? Well, 4 things, first off. So no surprise, decision-making in uncertain and complex times. You wouldn't expect anything else given what's happened over the last 6 to 9 months. Data analysis, data-driven decision-making has been growing for 2 or 3 years in all of our surveys and becoming more important. Not surprisingly, sustainability, corporate social responsibility, these sorts of themes, and innovation. All 4 are very much to the fore. But also, in our Tomorrow's MBA study last year, we found 4 out of 10 saying it's very important that their studies include responsible management. Similar numbers also saying they want ethical leadership behavior, they want studying of global challenges such as climate change and poverty, and 39% expect diversity and equality to be part of their studies. So here is a whole set of new content that students are expecting to be part of the programs they're going to study. Not that they're going to study these things on their own in isolation, but how they apply across business education, whether that's accounting, finance, marketing, HR, whatever it might be. Where does ethical leadership fit into these areas? Where does climate change and other things and poverty, where does equality and diversity and inclusion, how do they apply across these different topics that students are considering? And what about the students themselves? What about the audience? Well, we gave students about a dozen different statements and asked whether they saw themselves being part of these statements, if you like. The top answer, 42%, said they were eager to explore their potential. Well, that's perhaps not new. Everybody's always been eager to explore their potential. 37%, though, ambitious to achieve positive change. This is perhaps different. This idea of sustainability, of corporate social responsibility, of ethical behavior, much more to the fore. And as part of that, yes, everybody's been interested in leadership before, but now determined to become an effective and inspiring leader, and to learn new skills again to advance their career in the future. So understanding the audience is incredibly important in determining the programs and the way those programs are delivered. Now, inevitably, any presentation at the moment has to have an element of the impact of the pandemic. And we conducted a project recently for the Executive MBA Council where we asked individuals and employers what impact COVID-19 has had on their learning and their working. And in our own study in Generation Web, we asked 600 students specifically who had been through online learning in the last 6 months, how that had impacted them. And some interesting and different answers. So first of all, 6 out of 10 saying the experience of online learning had failed to match that of classroom learning. Well, it's not a surprise, really. That immediate transition from studying in the classroom to studying on Zoom or Teams or some other platform, it was bound to be compromised to a certain extent. 4 out of 10 going on to say that the experience of online learning has left them less interested in their subject of study. Difficult to be motivated sometimes, complicated by the situation that they have to study in online, maybe at home with others around, difficult circumstances. However, a third say the experience of online learning has surprised them, exceeding their expectations. And just over a third said the experience of online learning has made them more likely to consider it in the future. So it hasn't been altogether a negative experience. And what is really interesting is when you ask people how they might undertake any future learning, just over half, 53%, say they prefer blended study, making it the most popular choice offered. Second most popular is classroom. Third most popular is entirely online. So this experience of learning in the pandemic has not necessarily been negative and has changed the way people are thinking about future study. Another important point here, this last bullet point, 1 in 5 women, 1 in 4 men say they've already used LinkedIn Learning. Another 1 in 8 women and 22% of men have used Coursera. And we do find that there is a growing interest in using what might be called alternative providers. And this is incredibly important because these skill-based providers, perhaps, or course-based providers using technology are very much potential competition for traditional business schools. But they also might be partners for those business schools to provide top-up learning, to provide reskilling, upskilling that isn't part of a traditional business education and part of a traditional university education. So an interesting pivot potentially, an interesting range of partners that are available. So we asked in the Executive MBA study, we asked employers about the impact of COVID-19. First point, 44% say their organization will embed flexible working as part of its future operations. And we see that particularly amongst the technology companies, the Googles, the Twitters, the Oracles, all of these sorts of organizations who perhaps already had an element of working from home, of distant learning, of distant working, but are now saying it's going to be part of their future in a much more substantial way. 31% say they don't anticipate any long-term implications for their organization. Apologies for the typo there in that bullet point. What that of course means is that 69% do potentially see long-term implications, whether that's embedding flexible working or whether it's other things. So really important. And just under half are saying that online learning is going to become the standard approach to developing people in their organization. The final point, in a way, is I suppose the most scary for a business school at the moment. A third anticipate learning and development spend in their organization being reduced for several years following the pandemic. We know time after time in recessions, the first thing that employers cut, learning, development, training. And we see here changes to the way people are working, changes to the way people are learning, and less money for organizations to help those people at work and developing their skills. So a very difficult situation, and potentially a drive to make those providing learning think in different ways and deliver in different ways. And so that's going to be important over the next few years. We then asked in the same study about individuals and the impact on them of COVID-19. And it's slightly different from what we find with employers. So first of all, 41% can't wait to get back to working the way they were before. No surprise there. Many of us miss, the social side of work, the opportunity to meet friends, to get involved in team working, and to do other things, to travel around the world as part of our businesses, and all sorts of things that bring us together. So it's no surprise that quite a large number want to get back to where they were before. But 20%, 1 in 5, are thinking about changing career or starting their own business, and 19% are going to change employer. So you see there some of that thinking that the students were talking about from See the Future, about how they saw their lives involving substantial change in their careers. A third want to have more flexibility in their work, including this opportunity to work from home more often than before COVID-19. For some, it's been a fantastic opportunity to work from home. They have the space, the opportunity, the resources. For others, it's been more difficult. So that's why we only have a third there. But it is, again, a substantial change. I saw some data recently for Australia. Before the pandemic, 5% were working from home. During the pandemic, that's risen to 45%. And it's absolutely clear it's not going to go all the way back down to 5% again. It may not be people working full time from home. It may be 2 or 3 days a week, but there will be a much larger number working from home or from a distance more often. And what is interesting, again, during the pandemic, 29% saying they're taking some online programs while working from home to enhance their employability. Again, it's not been possible for everybody, but part of this recognition, those who are thinking of changing careers, starting their own business, changing employer, have recognized that if they can add some skills during the pandemic to their CV, then there's a real opportunity to enhance their careers going forward. And I want to give you just a little example of what this might mean in practice. So this is a picture of St Ives in Cornwall. I actually live about 20 minutes away, which is very nice on occasions. But St Ives is 5 hours away from London by train. There's a single flight a day from Heathrow to an airport about 45 minutes from St Ives. And yet, in the last 6 months during lockdown, there's been a 170% increase in property sales in St Ives. And why is that happening? Well, if you're living in a 2-bedroom flat in London and you were locked down in March, April time through to maybe the end of May, then all of a sudden the prospects, the benefits of living in London are much reduced. Perhaps the health service is under pressure. Perhaps you don't have the space at home. Perhaps you have young children at home in that small flat. The idea of living in that sort of environment compared to the quality of life that you can have in Cornwall, but not just the quality of life, the ability and potential to continue your job because of technology, because of the opportunities that technology brings, means that living in London and living in Cornwall are perhaps changing in terms of their status and their value. And I think this is a very interesting thing, which we're seeing not just in the UK. I spoke at a conference recently and somebody from France said, yes, Normandy is our St Ives. People moving out of Paris. We know in New York that there has been a slow trend of people moving out of the city to the suburbs into neighboring and more distant states in some cases. So it's very much a trend in the developed world. Whether it's also there in the developing world, it is less clear. The mega cities of places like Cairo and Lagos and Delhi, Mumbai, many of the Chinese cities are still very much to the fore. but there do seem to be some possibilities for people to work in different places, in different ways, because of technology, and others are grasping this opportunity for a better quality of life. So what do we see in the future? What do we see in terms of employers and the way that and business schools are thinking of going forward? Well, some important points here. So 65% expect more of their learning in the next 3 years to involve blended study, but 59% still think that face-to-face provides a richer and more effective experience in online learning. And what is going on here is you've got an older age group in companies, in organizations, who perhaps have not grown up in the same way that Generation Z have, with the internet and digital being part of their everyday lives. So they're more used to face-to-face learning. Their first degrees at university were 99%, if not 100% face-to-face. And so that experience, that knowledge of learning in that way tends to be the one that they go to first. However, what we are seeing, and it came through very clearly in the LinkedIn study, was that it was actually Generation Z who preferred the on-campus experience. They knew that their peers who had gone before them, maybe just a year or two before them, had had a wonderful experience on campus. And so they wanted to replicate that. Whereas the older groups increasingly were saying, for cost reasons, for convenience reasons, for family reasons, for housing reasons, I'm much more interested in looking at the possibilities of online learning than going back to university and having a face-to-face experience. So some interesting changes taking place in terms of how people might study as well. And then we asked faculty, we asked academics, what skills should students learn? And it's interesting, there's a great crossover with what students say they ought to be learning. But here we are, top issue, critical thinking. Secondly, emotional intelligence, how that plays into leadership and working with people in different ways. Ambiguity and uncertainty, again, very much a theme at the moment. Complex problem solving, and interestingly, cross-cultural understanding. One of the themes that comes across in several of the studies we've done this year is a need for leaders to be better able to lead teams, both cross-cultural and cross-age group. So leading diverse teams has become ever more important, and ensuring inclusivity, ensuring equality amongst those teams as part of that. So this is a real growth area for business education, we believe. What does this therefore mean for the future of business schools? So again, asking faculty, what do they say? Almost 2/3 think schools will face increasing competition, which will lead some to merge or close completely. We've already seen a number of schools merge in France, for instance. We've seen a number of schools close, not necessarily business schools, liberal arts colleges in the US. So there is already a sense of the market changing. And a third almost believe schools will increasingly close their full-time MBA. It doesn't mean the MBA is about to disappear. There'll still be full-time MBA programs, but there will also be part-time, online, executive, blended, all sorts of different ways of delivering an MBA. So, some issues of concern there, but where are the opportunities? So 9 out of 10 faculty believe their schools will have to evolve to meet the rapidly changing skills required by employers. And not just the content, but there again, 87%, a wide range of courses to enable lifelong learning. So the types of courses, and then again, 78% more flexible approaches to taking a degree. So the content, the way you learn, the types of courses, and one indicator of what those courses might include, a broader curriculum including arts and sciences as part of a business degree. So a real sense of change, rather than that heavy focus on accounting, of corporate finance or human resources or marketing, a real broadening out in terms of what people might learn and different approaches to that learning. And I'll come back to that in my conclusions. I think this is a great quote from a dean of a business school as part of the executive MBA study that we did. They talked about traditional business schools being product-centered like a vinyl LP, when the contemporary school needs to be more like Spotify, more flexible, more drawing in content from a wide range of different sources, and challenging people as well with the opportunity to not just listen to the music that they've always listened to, but perhaps listen to music that they've never listened to before. Certainly my daughter is a keen user of Spotify and enjoys listening to radio stations from right around the world. So really bringing something new to the experience, and business schools perhaps need to think in a similar sort of way. So a little bit more about what faculty are thinking. Where are the opportunities? Today, three things are highlighted. International partnerships. Of course, those international partnerships would have been physical partnerships perhaps, but are now virtual partnerships. Growing the offer in terms of executive education, those new programs, new curriculum that we've talked about, and increasing postgraduate numbers. And then looking forward to the next decade, not just postgraduates, but lifelong learning. Perhaps not degree programs, but short courses, developing degree programs with other faculties. So working in partnership, providing transnational education. So having campuses in different parts of the world, extending the brand of an organization to other parts of the world and delivering other types of programs. And also partnering with private companies to deliver new programs. Some people may be aware of the Arizona State University collaboration with Starbucks, where Starbucks employees can now take a program and get a degree through ASU if they don't previously have a degree. Some people will be aware of how UBS, the Swiss bank, has set up their own finance training online service, which is accessible not just to staff, but to any member of the public. So there are all sorts of evolving ways of delivering education. And what do business schools intend to do? Well, 3 courses are going to offer digital badges and 3 courses are going to offer micro masters in the next 3 years. So that thought is already there about different types of programs, not just degrees, that can meet the needs of individuals who are looking, as this person said in our executive MBA study, I want to have teaching that allows me to apply something next Monday that I've learned today. I don't have the time to wait and the world is moving so fast. So speed and flexibility and focus in terms of the particular skill that I want is becoming much more important in terms of business education, rather than a broad degree spread out over a number of years. And much of this can be seen in a report that McKinsey produced 3 years ago. They talk about effectively workers of the future having to have the skills to do jobs that computers can't do. Because if computers can do something, they can almost certainly do it more quickly, they can do it more effectively and more efficiently. And so instead, alongside some of these hard skills, individuals will need more social and emotional skills, more advanced cognitive capabilities, as McKinsey say, logical reasoning, creativity. If they can add these skills, let's not call them soft skills, but these human skills, if you like, to the hard technical skills that they have, become very much a T-shaped employee, if you like, a solid core, and then that broad spread of other skills, then it will make them more valuable and more effective as they go forward. So why do employers not use business schools? Why is there a gap, if you like, at the moment? 4 things that come up in the studies that we've done. So a third say other providers simply offer programs that better meet their development needs. Maybe that's a signal to business schools to start thinking about the programs they're offering. Secondly, about a third again saying schools are too theoretical, not sufficiently abreast of the real world challenges. So that example of ASU and Starbucks partnership, bringing the two together becomes incredibly important. Schools don't have the specific expertise we're seeking. So again, maybe looking beyond the business school into the rest of the university, or looking to other business schools around the world to find partners who do have those specific skills. And then the fourth one, we've not seen any real impact back in the workplace after investing in a business school program. And schools are going to have to get a lot smarter at providing the data that demonstrates the impact they have in the real world, in the workplace, how people take the skills that they've learned in business schools and apply them effectively and to the benefit both of their employers, but wider society as well. So when we ask employers specifically what they want, there it is. We're back to the McKinsey report: stronger social and emotional skills, more advanced cognitive capabilities, logical reasoning, creativity. 88% of employers already recognize this need to bring up these more human skills, if you like. They also think students should have the broader curriculum. We saw that from faculty, we see it from students as well, including arts, humanities, and scientists. So adding some of those STEM subjects, perhaps adding some of those arts subjects, some of the skills that come across in those subjects becoming important in terms of those social and emotional skills in the point above. Recruits will have to embrace digital transformation, bringing together technology and management skills. And again, we've seen over the last 3 years in our prospective master study, in our prospective MBA study, an increasing number of students saying they want technology management degrees. Why do they want that? Well, perhaps they want to be involved in some of these digital companies, some of these startups, but they're not going to start a business themselves necessarily. So they want to be part of that experience. And to do so, they need to understand how technology and management can work together, how they can blend those skills, how they can lead teams of technologists and deliver projects effectively and efficiently. And so they will need employees who can work in this multinational and multicultural workforce. As I said, and maybe I should say multi-age workforce as well, with a strong entrepreneurial outlook and a focus on social responsibility. So it's this combined approach, a business approach, but also society approach, pulling the two together to make an effective business education and to give individuals the skills that they need. And why are employers seeking learning? What are the things that have driven their learning over the last 3 years? Not surprisingly, number one, digital transformation. It's almost a core part. Whereas schools in their MBAs, it used to be corporate finance that was the core. Now today, they need to make sure that digital transformation is at the core of their learning, because that's where employers are looking for assistance. They want help as well with equality and diversity. We're back to these issues: equality, diversity, inclusion, a key part, and will only be more important going forward. Artificial intelligence, clearly a part of the digital narrative that employers are looking at. Productivity, operational efficiency have always been there, and data analytics, again, very much to the fore over recent years, as I mentioned earlier. And therefore, the programs that employers are looking for: digital transformation, innovation, technology management, creativity, and design thinking. No surprises there, given everything that we've talked about previously in the presentation. So a few slides just to conclude. What might the classroom of the future look like? Well, it might not look like a classroom. It might not look like a coffee shop. Many of you will have seen somebody with their laptop nursing a coffee for 3 or 4 hours, and maybe they're actually working. Maybe they're learning. This is going on everywhere and anywhere. The point about it is that there'll be this digital wrapper or digital thread that'll run through almost every aspect of learning. In some places, it'll be more important. It'll be before, during, and after a formal learning experience. In others, it may just be one part of that, but it will be everywhere. We'll have more stackable degrees, where degrees are put together in modules, where people are taking a module in a particular subject or a particular skill that is relevant to their career at that particular time, rather than the extended 3-4 year degree covering everything, just a small part of that degree because it's relevant now. And those learning experiences won't just come from traditional business schools and universities. Instead, alternative providers offering alternative qualifications will be part of the experience for young people and for those at other points in their lives. I think this is a really good summary of how things might be changing. So this is from the former Singapore education minister. He's now the transport minister, but he gave an interview to the Straits Times newspaper in Singapore back in January, February this year. And this is just some of what he had to say. In Singapore, they want more people to study. They want a participation rate to grow from 40 to 50%, but not 18-year-olds, mature learners, as he says, working adults who want to pursue higher qualifications, but not necessarily a traditional 4-year degree route. They can pursue it through part-time studies or other sorts of ways. And really important second paragraph there, the idea of front-loading education, completing all your study before going out to work, will be an idea of the past. Instead, you might study for a year or 2 years, get some basic knowledge, go out, start working, and then add to that as you go forward. One of the really interesting things he talked about, which isn't here in this quote, is that at the National University of Singapore, they're now getting people in and enrolling them, not just for 3 or 4 years, but for 20 years, because they realize that people will have to study throughout their careers. And as a consequence, they will need to be part of a learning community, and they want to build brand loyalty to the National University and keep people learning and being part of a flexible community where they can learn in different ways, in different places, at different times, using different techniques, but to get the skills they need for the jobs that are relevant at that particular time. So a final slide. What might tomorrow's business school look like? A number of points here. First of all, distinctive values. Differentiation will be very important. So potential learners can understand quickly what a particular business school will offer. Secondly, in partnership, not isolated. So not working on their own, not seeing business as a standalone subject, but seeing business connected with other parts of a university, potentially with other organizations outside a university, or with other institutions in other parts of the world. Third, having a purpose and a focus on purpose. It's a word that's being used a lot at the moment, but this idea that it's important to be part of society and to have that focus on the way society is changing and contributing through education. And I think following up on that point, being committed, not just engaged. For a long while, we talked about being more engaged with society, but actually it has to be more than that. What are we actually going to change? How are we going to be committed rather than just engaged? Fifth point, making the most of research to deliver impact. So connecting research, the responsible management research, to the real world, making it relevant to business, making it relevant to society, and showing that as well, whether that's through stories, whether that's through data, but absolutely convincing people of the power of research. Being flexible in study approaches for life, not just degrees. So there's no reason why business schools shouldn't offer different types of programs, not just degrees. A great example, Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford, 3 years ago launched their first short course, non-degree online program. 8 weeks of study, 11 hours a week, entirely online, never visiting Oxford. The first program was on fintech, and they had 1,000 people sign up, each paying £2,500 for that program. So straight away you can see, it's a nice piece of revenue to add to the opportunity. Today, 3 years on, there are 9, 10, maybe even more programs that they have delivered in the same way, delivered on multiple occasions during a year, quite often, and over 10,000 people going through these programs, paying the same sort of fee. So all of a sudden, a considerable change in the business approach to business education. And as part of that, accommodating this idea of just-in-time learning. Now, we talked about just-in-time supply chains for a long while, but now just-in-time learning as well. The ability for somebody to study on a Monday night and apply on a Tuesday morning back at work. And not surprisingly, all of this, as I said earlier on with a digital wrapper, digital will be part of the delivery for whatever reasons, whether people are living and working remotely, whether it's convenience, whether it's cost, but digital will be a theme right throughout learning from the age of 5, dare I say, from the very early age, right through to 50s and even into the 60s, 70s, and potentially the 80s as well. This will be something that is part of our lives and will be part of the business education that makes up our careers and ensures that we remain in employment, enjoying life, and making the most of the companies and organizations that we work for. So that's where I'm going to finish. Very happy now to take some questions, and I can see there are already 1 or 2 in the Q&A there.
Yes, Andrew, thank you so much for your great presentation. I think it will resonate with all of us here in the audience. And yes, we have a couple of questions, and I would like to start with the question that is also, I believe, very important for CEEMAN, where we focus a lot on faculty development, on staff development. So which skills should business schools focus for developing themselves, for their faculty, for their staff, for the leadership of business schools? What will make a difference to succeed in the future?
Wow, it's an enormous question. So it's going to be something that's digitally connected, that involves technical skills. But I think the important point is not to the exclusion of everything else, because as I said, it's that combination of digital and human skills. I don't like calling them soft skills, like digital and human skills. It's about how we relate to each other. How we relate to each other, amongst our friends, but amongst our work colleagues, and amongst people outside of that group as well, who we might come across because our company is working with them, we might be recruiting them, we might be selling them services. So it's that combination of digital and human that are so important, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a question from Natalia Makucha from Russia, who is asking if there are any significant differences in attitudes towards online learning in different countries. And maybe if you could comment also, if you can give an example when different skills are required at different times, which we teach in different ways.
Yeah, a couple of interesting thoughts here. So we did some work with the University of Sussex in the UK a few years back. And they found something really interesting, which I think is relevant here. So they were teaching in a typical lecture theatre. They might have a class of 100 people. A large number of them might be international students. And when the lecturer would try to engage them, the international students largely did not engage. They didn't ask questions and things, because what is happening is, of course, they're translating the English into their own language and they're thinking about the answer, then they're trying to translate it back, by which time the conversation has moved on. And the university recognized that this wasn't a good way forward. So they said, well, what can we do? And what they started to do was have a live Twitter feed projected up onto the whiteboard in the classroom, because people were much happier writing a question on Twitter than they were trying to go backwards and forwards in a language that wasn't their first language. So there's a really simple example of where technology applied in a certain way makes a difference to people's learning. Now, another example I came across recently, somebody said, well, when you want to do online learning in some parts of the world, it's a problem. Maybe it's a problem because the broadband speeds are not so good, but maybe it's a problem simply because people live in very small apartments. And if they have if they have a family, or if they have just a partner in that apartment, then there's no space for them where they can be one-on-one with somebody on the screen. It's very difficult. And pre-pandemic, they could go out to a coffee shop, put their earphones in and carry on learning. That's not possible when you've been locked down. And so the opportunity to learn digitally is sometimes reduced for various reasons in different countries. So yes, there are different approaches and different attitudes. There are different services, and I talked about Weibo at the beginning. You'll find right around the world different providers delivering digitally. So there are things to consider when you're looking at learning in different ways and using different skills in different times.
Thank you. Another question, and that's a tricky one, and I think offers us an opportunity to take an honest look at ourselves. How much do you see business schools actually doing the necessary changes? Do you feel that the industry is actually making the necessary shift? Are we ready for this transition? Are we on the good way?
It's interesting. I'm sure what we have found in recent years is that the demographics have meant that there have been large numbers of 18-year-olds coming into higher education, and it's been relatively easy for schools to fill their classes. It's not been a difficulty. There have been growing numbers of international students looking to study across the world. And so there hasn't been the imperative to make the changes that I've been talking about. Of course, the pandemic has changed all that. It's accelerated some of the trends that were already there. And so some schools had already begun to introduce online learning and were in a good position. Others have had to do it. I think a Chinese dean said to me, we had a plan to introduce online learning over the next 3 years, but in February we had to do it in 3 weeks. And so that change is now happening, and we won't go back. We may adjust what we're doing. We may, of course, everybody has big lecture theatres. They'll want to make use of these spaces, but they will continue to do some of the online and the digital as well. So that part of the world will change. I think also we see those examples like I talked about at Said. It could equally be HBX, which is now Harvard Business School Online. It might be an organization like Emeritus in Singapore, who are providing programs from other institutions. It might be the hundreds of institutions that are now working with someone like Coursera or FutureLearn. So I think, whilst there is still some reluctance, and some, dare I say, vice chancellors of universities or presidents of universities who are perhaps a little slower to change, there are plenty of good examples. And when you see other people doing it and succeeding at it, then you think you can do it yourself.
Great, thank you. Another question relates to the well-being of stakeholders, because there's a lot of anxiety going on different levels, of course, among the employees and staff, students, in the business, of course. So what can business schools do to help build the resilience, both psychological or physical? And should they incorporate that in their programs more?
Yes, look, going to business school is not just about the learning, it's about the experience. And therefore, whether that's alumni relations, whether it's coaching, whether it's sports, whether it's extracurricular activities, or whether it's mental health issues and well-being, all of this has to be part of the overall experience. And finding the organizations, quite often external, to support that is going to be certainly more important. And the same is true of issues such as equality and diversity and inclusion. All of these are not necessarily things that have been core for a business school, and so maybe in a university setting a little bit more, but it's certainly not core for a business school. So finding the people who can support and add to that experience from outside is going to be incredibly important going forward.
Thank you. The last question before we pass the floor to Danica again for the final word. What recommendation, what specific steps would you recommend the schools to start taking tomorrow or even today to succeed in the future?
Dear. Well, inevitably, get in touch with myself and have CarringtonCrisp do some consulting. That's the obvious answer. No, the serious answer, I think, is talk to the employers that you're in touch with. Talk to your advisory board. Talk to the people outside of your business school and say, how is their world changing? And then when they tell you how their world is changing, talk to them about how you as a business school can help them make those changes. So don't look inside, look outside, because that's where you'll begin to see the future. And then you can react and apply to that future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed it because, in the beginning, you were talking a lot about technical side of the changes, but then you, of course, the second part of your lecture was very much devoted to the real stuff, to the content, which will be the most difficult to change. And we are also in our school thinking a lot about how not to make school any more product oriented, but market oriented. That means talking with people, etc. How to engage alumni and our advisory board and business, supervisory board to be included in that and to give some advice to people, to help us, to have them there. What I learned today, I could use tomorrow, was the biggest compliment we received already 30 years ago from our MBA graduates. I asked them, what are the 2 best compliments you can give to our school? And they said that what I learned today, I could use tomorrow, and that I was even not half an hour annoyed in all this year of the study. So this were for me something That really counts, you know. What I was noticing and what I liked very much and agree very much is, you know, you said analytic skills, logical stuff, but also emotional. So to find the real equilibrium between that. Then, you know, learning from other professions. This we are all the time saying, you know, and that's why I'm not in fact surprised, because every day they almost every day they call us and ask whether they could come to listen to art and leadership and to all that, you know. So these are all great things. And at the end, I would like to say that my biggest challenge now in the school is how to turn high touch experience, on which we were well known, through the high tech. And I see that this is possible, but you have to be even more innovative, even more, you know, with full of imagination. So, great lecture. Thank you very much. I'm sure that most of the participants recognize themselves in your efforts and in your lecture, and make us enthusiastic that it's worthwhile trying and changing. And that is what we shall do. What you told in 1 hour, we shall have to do next, you know, starting immediately, but it will take some years. You know, it's really fantastic. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you again on our screen and in our classroom. Thank you.
I hope in the classroom and on the screen, as you say high touch and high tech.
Yes,
thank you very much.
And thank you, the organizers, Živa and Slađana, for this great event. Thank you. And Olga, of course, but I know that these two girls were, you know, really doing it. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you to participants for their attention, for their questions. We will share all materials with you. Thank you so much and have a good day forward. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.